Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Willie Curry case, if you don't mind. This is a case that began in one summer in August of 2013. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the case began with a chance encounter. So Willie Curry was not from here, he's from Detroit. He came up to Mount Pleasant to visit a friend, and he came with his girlfriend, Tammy Pollard. And I think they came up here maybe for some drug dealing and maybe also to visit the casino, but it doesn't really matter. They came up here to see their friend. And at the same time that Willie Curry was up here with Tammy Pollard, there were 3 girls in a group home here. And they were 15 and 16 years old. And they all had different reasons for being placed in the group home. They had a lot of the vulnerabilities that I talked about at the beginning. So one girl had been sexually abused for most of her life, and her dad had just gone to prison. And understandably, she had a lot of issues. And she was placed in a group home because her family was having a hard time taking care of her, and she was cutting herself. And she had lived a very traumatic life. And then another victim had a mother with a drug problem, and so her mom was a really bad influence on her. And her parents were divorced, and the court said to this young girl, "You can't see your mom anymore." And she kept running away to see her mom, and so her dad made the difficult decision to place her into a group home. And then the third girl had just had a hard life too, and was running away a lot. 16-year-olds don't always make the best choices. I think that we all can agree with that. So they were in this group home, and at the same time that Willie Curry was walking around Mount Pleasant, these girls went to a park. They went to Island and Nelson Park. These are the girls. So I put up the picture because I came up here when I was getting ready for trial, and I needed to imagine where this all took place. So we took some pictures so I could visualize it. And so they went to Island and Nelson Park, and they went for a walk with their group home. And then they had already agreed together. When we have a free moment, when we distract the woman who's here to take care of us, we're going to run the other way. And that's what they did. They ran away, and they had really no plan whatsoever. They're 15 and 16. They have no money. They have no cell phones. They can't call their parents because they're going to get put back in the group home. So they just want to run, though, because they've run away before, so they just take off running, and they don't really have any idea of how this is going to turn out or what's going to happen. And then they come to this river in, I don't know if it's Island or Nelson Park, but they come to the river, and they see a man. And there's Willie Curry, and he's standing in the river, and he's fishing. It's kind of an incredible story, but that's just what happens. He just happens to be standing there in the river fishing. And this is a picture that we took off of his cell phone. So he's actually took a picture of himself fishing, which is a great exhibit for me at trial. And the 3 girls come running. They've just run away from their group home. Their adrenaline is pumping, and he's the first person that they see. And so they call out to him. He's on the other side of the river. And they had no plan until this point, and then they see him, and they get a small plan. Well, maybe he has a cell phone. Maybe he's going to let us use his cell phone, and we can call one of our friends, or we can call the mom that's not going to call and turn us in, and she can come pick us up. And so they shout to him, "Hey, can we use your phone? We just ran away from our group home." And he says, "Sure." So they literally swim across the river to him, climb out on the other side, and they may not have had a plan, but of course, when Willie Curry sees them, he is an opportunistic guy, and the wheels start turning in Mr. Curry's head. And so even though we know he has a cell phone because he took this picture, he says, no, I don't have my cell phone with me. Come with me. Walk up to the house. Come with me. We'll go get my phone, and you can use it, and you can call whoever you need to call. So that's what they do, and they go up to the house, and they're dripping wet, and Willie Curry introduces them to his girlfriend, Tammy Pollard, and he takes Tammy aside, and he says, "Hey, I've got an idea. I think we can make some money off of these girls." And of course, as soon as the girls see him, they blurt out, "We just ran away from a group home. We're 15 and 16 years old." Right away. They just tell him the whole thing. And he says, "Okay, well, I'm not, the police are probably looking for you, so we'll leave town tomorrow." So they spend the night at the house where Willie Curry and Tammy Pollard were staying. And the next morning, they leave, and they're in Tammy's pink Cadillac. I'm telling you, I can't make these facts up, but that's the truth. They're in Tammy's pink Cadillac. And as they leave town, they make the girls crouch down because they think that, rightfully, that police could be out looking for them. So they crouch down, and they take the girls to Detroit. And what they've told them at this point is, hey, come to Detroit. This is going to be great. I'm going to get you cell phones. I'm going to get you clothes. You're going to have money. Eventually, you can have your own house. And this is going to be great. And, what the girls, what are the other choices? They don't really have anything right now, right? They know they don't want to go back to the group home. He tells them that the police are looking for them and they're going to go and get held in juvenile detention. And so they think, okay, we'll go with this guy. But things change when they get to Detroit, and he says to them, well, you're here and you need to work for me. You need to do dates. And he then takes them each separately upstairs in the home and takes explicit photographs of them to send out on his phone to potential customers to say, these are the girls I have, and here's their prices. One of the girls they were all upset about it, but one in particular was very upset. She had never had sex with anyone before. And in his text messages, he wrote, $400 for my virgin, which down the road was some good evidence for us. So he really saw an opportunity here to make some money. So he starts having the two do dates. He's encouraging the third one to do dates. She's trying to stay away from him. And he's also giving them drugs and alcohol. And then as time goes on, he starts to be violent with them as well. So one of the girls, let's see, I have a little timeline here for you. So the dates that the victims were with Mr. Curry was between August 3rd and August 19th. And so it's August 3rd that they run away and they meet Curry in the park, and then it's the next day on August 4 when Curry and Pollard bring the girls to Detroit. And then for the next couple of weeks, they start with the pornographic pictures, and then they start arranging for the dates. One of the victims, at one point, does something that makes Mr. Curry really angry. She performs a sex act for someone without getting paid for it. And it's a graphic thing to talk about, but it's often what we see in these cases. The pimp wants complete control over the victim. So he also controls who she has any kind of sexual relations with. So when he finds out that she's performed a sex act, and she didn't get paid for it, and he didn't set it up, he's really angry with her. So he takes her upstairs in the home, and he proceeds to beat her with a metal broomstick. And the other two victims can hear this happening, which is an important part of the case legally because it's the force, and then the other victims hear it, and it has an impact on them as well. Because you don't have to beat all three of them if you just beat one and the other two are afraid. So he beats her with a metal broomstick, and Tammy Pollard is there the whole time, rubbing his back, talking to him. She's the one who told him when she found out about the sex act that the victim had performed that she didn't get paid for. And before that even happened, sort of a crucial moment in the case for them was what they would have to do to attract these dates. Willie Curry was a little new to this business, so he either chose not to or didn't really know about Craigslist and Backpage. So he was trying to do this the old-fashioned way. So he would have Tammy Pollard take the three girls in her Cadillac and just drive around town and make the girls get out of the car at a gas station, and he would make them wear some skimpy clothes. And they were supposed to get out and walk around and get phone numbers. And one day, they didn't feel like it, or they didn't want to, or maybe they were talking back to Tammy Pollard. And so she called Willie Curry on the phone, because he wasn't there in the car, and she said that they're not listening. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. And he said, okay, well, come meet me at this abandoned house. So she brought them there, and he was waiting inside. And then they came in, and the two girls who wouldn't get out of the car, he went up to them and he asked them all who got out of the car, who didn't. And for the two that wouldn't get out of the car, he slapped them, or he started beating them in front of the third one. And it turned out, this is an interesting part of the trial for us, there was a man who lived in this abandoned house who was friends with Mr. Curry, and he used to let Curry cut up his crack cocaine in the house to pay him. So he's essentially a crack addict. But he hears this slapping happening, and he comes downstairs and he's like, what's going on? And Willie Curry says to him, I'm just disciplining my hose. Now that's important for us because we actually found this guy, and he's clean now, and he's doing well, and he testified for us. And that was a powerful way for us to corroborate what the victims said. They all said this, a very similar thing, but of course 3 people might experience something slightly different. But then we had another individual who said, yeah, I was upstairs and I heard some slapping happening downstairs, and I came down and I said, what's going on? And the defendant said to me, I'm just disciplining my hose. So for some of the victims, after that incident of the slapping when they didn't get out of the car, they knew what the deal was. They knew that they were going to get physically assaulted if they didn't do what they were supposed to do. And then we had the incident with the metal broomstick. And then on August 14th, the victim who had never had sex before and had not gone on any dates up until this point, she had refused to go. The defendant had come to her and said, it's time for you to go on a date, and she would say no. So that particular night, the other 2 girls went on the date, and she was home alone with the defendant, or she went to sleep, and then the defendant came home, and he woke her up and he raped her. And he told her, I'm just getting you ready for your dates. And that was, she had really had it at that point. So the next day, in the morning, she went into or late at night, I suppose, she went into the bathroom, she locked the door, and she turned the shower on. And then she opened the bathroom window, climbed out the window. Now this is Detroit. This is a girl who was unfamiliar with Mount Pleasant because she wasn't from here, but she has never been to Detroit before in her life. And as you may have been picturing accurately, this is not a great part of town. It's a pretty dangerous area. But things were so terrible for her that she climbed out of that window at like 5 in the morning and just started running. And she went up to she finally made her way to a gas station and went in to try to get someone to use her phone, and the guy inside said, oh, my phone's not here, you can come use my phone somewhere else. And she'd heard that before, so she didn't go with him, and she walked out, and this woman, and I'm going to call her Big Mama because that's what she calls herself, this woman had pulled into the gas station, and the victim went up to her and said, I need help. And Big Mama was a witness for us at trial, and from Big Mama's perspective, she saw this girl and she could tell immediately that she was in distress, that she was terrified and in a really bad situation. And the girl said, can I use your phone? And she said, yes, but you got to get in the car, and I'm locking the doors because this is a bad neighborhood. So the victim gets in the car with her. They lock the doors, and she lets her use her phone, and she calls her dad. It's the first person that she calls. And her dad's in Grand Rapids. And she says, and she had emailed a little bit with her dad. So they had controlled that they couldn't use the computer, but she snuck away and fired off an email to her dad. So they had emailed a little bit, and she had told them she had gotten herself into a really terrible situation. And then they found out that she'd used the computer, and she was afraid she was going to get beaten for that when she ran away. So she calls her dad. Her dad picks up. It's 6 in the morning, and she tells him, I'm in Detroit. I'm in a really bad situation, and he talks to Big Mama on the phone and says to Big Mama, I'm in Grand Rapids, and she says, I don't know where that is. And he said, well, just get on 96 and start driving. And so she did, and the victim's dad did the same thing, and they drove and met in Okemos on 96. And so, the dad gets out of his car, and his daughter comes running up to him. And he took her straight to the Michigan State Police and in Rockford, Michigan. And they interviewed her. She reported the rape right away. They did a rape kit, which was great evidence for us down the road. We had DNA evidence. And of course, everyone, Mount Pleasant police had responded to the girls that ran away, but no one really knew where they were. But once this victim ran away and was interviewed by the Michigan State Police, of course, the channels of communication start happening. She knew the address of the place where she was. So she reported that to the police. So the FBI and the Michigan State Police went out to the house. But when Willie Curry woke up the next morning and found that the victim was gone, he was really angry. And he made Tammy Pollard go look for her with his gun. And he told the other 2 victims that when I find her, I'm going to kill her. And then he moved them because he knew the police were going to be coming to his house. So he moved them back to that abandoned house where they'd been beaten in the beginning of the time. And then police did go to Willie Curry's house and looked for the girls, and they weren't there. So it took a few more days before one of the victims was able to call her mom, give her mom the address, and they had actually been moved back to the original house, and the FBI came and found them and interviewed them. And so by August 19th, they were all recovered safely. So at trial, and let me just also say something about interviewing victims, because some of you are law enforcement or you're victim services, and you might talk to victims. And it's difficult and it's impossible to expect that when you first encounter a victim and you've just rescued her from this situation, that she's going to be able to tell you the whole story from beginning to end, right? Like that's, even as full-grown adults or people without traumatic backgrounds, if we have to explain something really complicated, you can't get it all out in just an hour or an hour and a half. So they were interviewed, they were able to tell what had happened. One of the victims did have some loyalty to the defendant, and she wasn't going to be truthful at first. And she said, no, nothing happened, it was fine, it was great. You know, this was the one who had been beaten with a broomstick, and she was not ready to tell what had happened to her, because she also doesn't know at this point if Willie Curry's going to find her. She doesn't know where she's going to go that night. You know, she's going to go back into a juvenile placement, but she doesn't know where. So it takes time, and you have to build rapport with victims before you can get the full story. And I expect that as a prosecutor. It's not how most law enforcement cases work, right? Usually, as law enforcement, if we talk to you, we want you to tell us the whole story, and we don't ever want to hear anything different, because that's an inconsistent statement, and that's going to be trouble for us down the road. But that's just not the way that it works. So they were interviewed multiple times by the FBI, and even as I was getting ready for trial, and I would sit down and interview them one more time, I would get more details that I didn't know, because you don't always ask the right question. So I found out right before trial that when one of the victims ran away from the group home, she brought a Justin Bieber book with her. And all the victims remembered this, you know, because we interview them all separately, because you don't want them all to hear what each other's saying. And then when I talked to the other victims, they remembered it too, which was great evidence for me, because one of the things I had to show was that he knew how old they were. So of course the victims say, we said we're 15, we're 16. Well, if the defense is that they're lying, it's just helpful to have her say, well, I have my Justin Bieber book. And then victim number 2 says, oh, well, victim number 1 brought a Justin Bieber book. And they all remembered it. And so how can you claim you don't know that these are kids when they've run away, you know, carrying, with no clothes, no money, and a Justin Bieber book? But every time I met with them, there were just more and more details that we would get. And that's just to be expected. So we charged Willie Curry and Tammy Pollard with sex trafficking of minors and by force, fraud, or coercion. So I said earlier, those are 2 separate crimes. Here, we were able to prove, and we argued, that he knew they were minors and he caused them to engage in a commercial sex act, or in the case of the victim that he raped, was attempting to get her to engage in a commercial sex act. But he also did it using force, fraud, or coercion, and then their age doesn't matter. And the force, fraud, or coercion is the beatings, the beating with the broomstick, the slapping in the abandoned house, the threats of violence. We also charged him with production of child pornography, and this was interesting because by the time we got his cell phone, he had deleted the pictures. They weren't there anymore. So it's kind of risky to charge it, but I charged it, and each victim sat up on the stand, and they were all so similar in what they said about, well, Mr. Curry called me upstairs and he made me take my clothes off, and he took pictures exactly like this, and then I looked at his phone later and I saw that he had sent them to potential customers. So they all described the pictures that he took, and the jury convicted him of production of child pornography, and we didn't even have the pictures. But we had a space on his phone where you could see the sequential numbers and what dates those would have been, and they were gone. So we argued that, you know, he deleted them. And then we also charged him with felon in possession of a firearm, because there was a gun recovered from his house when they executed the search warrant, and he did have felony convictions. And we also got that broomstick that he had used to beat one of the victims, and you could see on the broomstick where it was bent. And everyone testified that the broomstick was new. They hadn't had it for that long. But as we had it, it had dents in it from where he had hit the victim. So that's type of evidence, the gun, the broomstick, and the DNA evidence could all corroborate the victims, because not surprisingly, there was a very aggressive defense, and the defense was, these girls are liars, they're runaways, you cannot believe them because they've always lied to people. These are bad girls. I mean, he may have even actually said that during the trial, these are bad girls. I was appalled. And the cross-examination of them was brutal. and really tried to make them look like they wanted to do this. I think the defense was, you wanted a wild ride. You were hoping to come to Detroit and party, and you came here and you wanted to party, and whatever happened, you did on your own. And Mr. Curry was just a nice guy that gave you a place to live, and that they must have all come together to make this story up, which of course is not, who would make up a crazy story like that? And they were all so consistent in their experiences. So the jury convicted Mr. Curry on all 8 counts, and he has not yet been sentenced, but he's facing a minimum of 15 years and up to life. So these are the penalties, the federal penalties. If the victim's under 14, the minimum's 15. If the victim's 14 to 17, it's 10, but with force, fraud, or coercion, which is what Mr. Curry was also convicted of, it's 15 to life. And forced labor doesn't have any minimums, and if there's no aggravating factors, it's up to a 20-year sentence. And the child exploitation crimes, I just put this up there for law enforcement out there. The penalties are really, really high. So taking of an explicit photograph is 15 years at a minimum. Receiving or distributing it is 5. And online enticement, which can be just someone meeting a minor online, even if they're in the same state, talking to them, getting them to take explicit photographs of themselves, or trying to convince them to prostitute. That can be online enticement, just that online relationship, and that's a minimum of 10 years. And then where you do have transportation across state lines, it's a 10-year minimum too, and that can sometimes be an easier crime to prove if you've got a victim who ran away in Michigan, like I had in one case, and she's found in a hospital in Minnesota. Well, how'd she get there? Well, the pimp had her due dates, got her money, and then bought them bus tickets and went to Minnesota, and they were eventually going to go to California. So just the fact that she's in Minnesota when she was supposed to be in Michigan is irrefutable fact right there. So we do charge that as well. All right, so this is a phone number for the Polaris Project. Anyone can make a tip to Polaris, forced labor, sex trafficking. You just see something that's funny that you want to, do a tip. You can always also, of course, contact law enforcement, FBI, police departments, but this is another way. And we do, as law enforcement, get these referrals. So an email will be sent to the FBI with whatever information someone is comfortable giving, and they will follow up on it. And then here's my contact information. And people call me with questions all the time, and that's completely fine. Even if you just are curious about something, you don't know who to contact, you just want to explain a fact pattern to me that seems suspicious to you, you're welcome to call me or send me an email.
I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank our hosts, because this is a scourge, human trafficking, that covers the entire state. And you who are in this room know far more than I knew when I started working on legislation on this 3-4 years ago. And for the state of Michigan, our legislation was originally based on the federal law, described it force, fraud, or coercion. And that was pretty basically it. We had some penalties, we had some prison time, we had some fines, and it was very simple and not real in-depth. So we started looking at it, and I am so grateful that Sara focuses on victims, and as we call them in our office, survivors, thrivers. And the folks that we've known and that we've worked with and who have become good friends are primarily women who are now on the front lines sharing their stories, and every story is different. Every circumstance is different, every location, but they're willing to put themselves through it time after time after time because they know it's happening, and they know it's happening right next door, regardless of where you live. So I did want to thank you, and I did bring a few brochures. These are the laws that were signed into public acts last January by the governor, and one of them does talk about the statute of limitations and extending that. And as Sara pointed out, it's tough to get those convictions because the farther you are out from the crime, the harder it is to get the evidence. But we felt it was important to give survivors an opportunity to at least evaluate whether they would go after their trafficker or not. We know one lady who was trafficked in the 80s. We know her traffickers are still operating. We have survivors who are 60 years old, and it happened to them when they were 13, 14. Never goes away, but they are stronger, and they're great advocates for what we're doing here in the state of Michigan, just as all of you are, because you're here tonight and you're involved. So just want you to know that when you see legislation that is proposed, and this isn't a very cool topic, you know, a lot of people don't like to hear about it. It's difficult to listen to some of these things, and they don't want to acknowledge that it could be happening right in their neighborhood. But when you see legislation that's proposed, and it is difficult, and you may hear that it's questionable whether it's actually going to pass, I can tell you that there are laws in here that we didn't think was going to pass. And we didn't think that these couple issues would, they got bogged down in politics, essentially. It really wasn't the issue itself. It wasn't whether it was credible or not. It was because there was politics involved when you get to the end of a session. And because people like you were willing to make phone calls to legislators, we got 21 laws passed. And we hope that it makes a difference for our law enforcement, for our prosecutors, and most importantly, for our survivors. And we want to see more convictions. We want to see Johns who are purchasing trafficked individuals. We want to see them have to face some consequences and own up to what they're doing and how it's affecting individuals. So there's more to come on this. That's one of the issues that we're working on. But just thank you to Sarah and her team, and the fact that people are committed to addressing this. And I just want to thank you for being here to learn more, and that you're willing to step into the fray. So thank you.
Thanks, Judy. Speaking of wanting to get into the fray, we have a sign-up sheet up here next to Cleo for a local human trafficking task force. I know it's something that we don't have here, and we would like anyone who wants to get involved to sign up, you in the red maybe, to get involved. So the sign-up's up there, and I just want to thank everyone for coming, and I know it's been a tough talk, and I hope if there's pizza left, feel free to take it with you, because we don't want it. So everyone have a really nice evening. Thank you.